Hello, beautiful friends. This is Laurel Bleadon-Maffei with Illuminating Souls, and this is Sleepy Bedtime Blessings, a podcast designed to help you rest, relax, and hopefully fall asleep. I am an angelic practitioner, a spiritual teacher, and an encourager of souls. And I am here to help you connect with your angels, deepen in your divine guidance, and awaken to the magic in your soul. During my waking life, I do this through angel sessions, soul mentoring, and a variety of classes. And you can learn more about this at my website, illuminatingsouls.com, where you also can register for the daily inspiration email blast. But in this moment, I am here to help you come into a sense of divine and restful sanctuary. So I invite you to take a beautiful breath in and out and allow your body to relax and let go. It is such a blessing to be here with you in this moment. You may be hearing some ambient noise in this broadcast, and this is because it's raining outside. So I'm recording this in the early hours of the morning. The sun hasn't yet come up, and truly it is one of my favorite times of the day because the world is still quiet. And I love getting to record for you at this time of the day. And it's one of those rainy mornings, and I am cozied up here. And you may have seen me post on social media about recording from my blanket fort. And I'll tell you why I do this. So, when the angels brought forward the inspiration for this podcast, I said, okay, but it has to be easy. Did you know we get to ask for things to be easy? It's one of my favorite ways of manifesting, is to ask for the path of greatest ease. Because I am one of those who has a tendency to overcomplicate things and want them to be perfect right out of the gate. So I know from other people who record sleep podcasts that a couple of them have shared that they record them from small spaces like closets in their home, where they hang blankets to dampen the sound. And my husband and I, we live in a small house. It's a good-sized house, but it's small. And we have no extra closets from which I can podcast from. So I'm in my office, which if you've watched any of my videos, you've seen sort of the layout. And I have a monitor in front of me, and I have one of those cozy Sherpa blankets, you know, that you can order on Amazon for $15. And it's wonderfully cozy. And so, as I was starting to record these episodes, the idea came to me that I could throw the Sherpa blanket over my monitor and over my head, creating a blanket fort of sorts, and it would help to dampen the sound. And if anyone is looking in at me, it must look very strange as I am huddled underneath a blanket. But I have come to love this ritual. I cozy on under the blankets with you in my blanket fort, and I call in the angels. And we get to snuggle up together, but in a healthy way. So the angels are already here, but I will say a prayer and blessing so that you know they are here as well. And if you're new to the world of angels, they are divine and loving beings. They shine love upon you in the way the sun shines light upon this earth. Your angels have known you since before you were born, and they have loved you since before you even knew you existed here. They advocate for you. They pray for you. And they whisper messages of encouragement and inspiration into your consciousness to support you as you navigate your life's journey. I love working with the angels so much because I find there is something profoundly healing and soothing about being in their divine presence. And you don't have to take a class to know how to call in the angels. All you have to say is, hey, angels, I could use some help here. And that opens the portal for them to be with you. So cozy on in, my beautiful friends, and allow your breath to grow deep. Allow your body to rest and let go. Snuggle into your covers just right. And just follow the rhythm of my voice as the angels and I keep you company as you drift off. So beautiful angels on high, I invite you to be with us now. I ask that you infuse this broadcast with waves of divine love, and that you calibrate this energy so that it infuses this broadcast with vibrations and alignment, with beautiful rest. I ask that you clear away any of the noise of the world, clearing away anything that does not belong to us, so that we can come present into divine sanctuary. And I want to acknowledge you that are here listening. I acknowledge you for the kindness in your heart. I acknowledge you for the hope that you allow to kindle in your spirit. even if that hope isn't present now. I can feel your wish to embody hope. Because as you connect with hope, you also allow your faith to be strengthened. And faith doesn't have to come wrapped in a religion or a ritual. It can be as simple as believing that even if it is raining today, that in all likelihood we'll get to see the sun tomorrow or the day after. It's remembering that there is a cycle to life. There's an ebb and flow to everything. And when we're in the flow, it's awesome. But when we're in the ebb, it can be challenging. So if you're in the ebb, the angels and I are sending you waves of love. The light is here for you. You are a beautiful being of light, and as you soak in this love that is being transmitted to you, it allows your light to come back online. And in this moment, there's nothing you need to do. The invitation is simply to receive. And I know that sounds simple, but you know, for a lot of us, receiving can feel challenging. So allow yourself to receive. Just if it's hard for you, you can simply ask the angels, angels, help me to receive and feel your love. Angels, I give you permission to help me awaken to the experience of feeling and knowing the presence of your divine love. And you know what? Just like a parched plant begins to revive when it is watered, the same is true for us. So while you rest, the angels will be bringing you love. There's nothing you need to do except simply to be. You are so precious in this world. And the angels and I are so deeply grateful for this opportunity to be with you. So together we're going to listen to the raindrops. Not sure if you can hear them, but I can, and it feels so cozy. And I'm going to be reading to you our second installment from Anne of Green Gables by Lucy Maud Montgomery. And I have to say, I am so enjoying reading this book for you. I love the rhythm of the words, and I love the brightness of Anne. And we left off in the last installment. We met Marilla and Matthew Cuthbert. They are brother and sister who live at Green Gables. And they're an older couple. We know this because they say that Matthew is around 60 years old. And they have decided to adopt an orphan boy to help them at the farm. And also so that the orphan could have a good life of being raised by people who loved them and have an opportunity and education and well-being. And Matthew is incredibly shy, and he drives the buggy to the train station to pick up their orphan. Only the orphan is not a boy. This orphan is a skinny girl with bright red hair. Her name is Anne. And Anne has a beautiful spark for life, a brilliant imagination, and she takes everything in. She talks a mile a minute and observes everything around her. And she and Matthew are in the midst of about an 8-mile buggy ride back to Green Gables. And this is where we're going to pick up. So Matthew and Anne have just arrived at the avenue, which is a beautiful stretch of road. The avenue, so called by the Newbridge people, was a stretch of road 400 or 500 yards long, completely arched over with huge, wide-spreading apple trees planted years ago by an eccentric old farmer. Overhead was one long canopy of snowy, fragrant blooms. Below, the boughs of the air was full of purple twilight, and far ahead a glimpse of painted sunset sky shone like a great rose window at the end of a cathedral aisle. Its beauty seemed to strike the child dumb. She leaned back in the buggy, her thin hands clasped before her. Her face lifted rapturously to the white splendor above. Even when they had passed out and were driving down the long slope to Newbridge, she never moved or spoke. Still with rapt face, she gazed afar into the sunset west, with eyes that saw visions trooping splendidly across that glowing background. Through Newbridge, a bustling little village where dogs barked at them and small boys hooted, and curious faces peered from the windows, they drove, still in silence. When 3 more miles had dropped away behind them, the child had not spoken. She could keep silence, it was evident, as energetically as she could talk. "I guess you're feeling pretty tired and hungry," Matthew ventured to say at last, accounting for her long visitation of dumbness with the only reason he could think of. "But we haven't very far to go now, only another mile." She came out of her reverie with a deep sigh and looked at him with the dreamy gaze of a soul that had been wandering afar, star-led. "Oh, Mr. Cuthbert," she whispered, "that place we came through, that white place, what was it?" "Well, now, you must mean the avenue," said Matthew after a few moments. "It's a kind of pretty place." "Pretty? Oh, pretty doesn't seem to be the right word to use, nor beautiful either. They don't go far enough." "Oh, it was wonderful, wonderful. It's the first thing I ever saw that couldn't be improved upon by imagination. It just satisfies me here. She put one hand on her breast. It made a queer, funny ache, and yet it was a pleasant ache. Did you ever have an ache like that, Mr. Cuthbert? Well, now I just can't recollect that I ever had. I have had it lots of time, whenever I see anything royally beautiful. But they shouldn't call that lovely place the Avenue. There's no meaning in a name like that. They should call it, let me see, the White Way of Delight. Isn't that a nice imaginative name? When I don't like the name of a place or a person, I always imagine a new one and always think of them so. There was a girl at the asylum whose name was Hepzibah Jenkins, but I always imagined her as Rosalia DeVere. Other people may call that place the Avenue, but I shall always call it the White Way of Delight. Have we really only another mile to go before we get home? I'm glad and I'm sorry. I'm sorry because this drive has been so pleasant, and I'm always sorry when pleasant things end. Something still pleasanter may come after, but you can never be sure. And it's so often the case that it isn't pleasanter. That has been my experience anyhow. But I'm glad to think of getting home. You see, I've never had a real home since I can remember. It gives me that pleasant ache again just to think of coming to a really, truly home. Oh, isn't that pretty? They had driven over the crest of a hill. Below them was a pond looking almost like a river, so long and winding it was. A bridge spanned it midway, and from there to its lower end, where an amber-hued belt of sand hills shut it in from the dark blue gulf beyond. The water was a glory of many shifting hues, the most spiritual shadings of crocus and rose and ethereal green, and other elusive tintings for which no name has ever been found. Above the bridge, the pond ran up into the fringing groves of fir and maple, and lay all darkly translucent in their wavering shadows. Here and there a wild plum leaned out from the bank, like a white-clad girl tiptoeing to her own reflection. From the marsh at the head of the pond came the clear, mournfully sweet chorus of the frogs. There was a little gray house peering around a white apple orchard on a slope beyond, and although it was not yet quite dark, a light was shining from one of its windows. "That's Barry's Pond," said Matthew. "Oh, I don't like that name either. I shall call it, let me see, the Lake of Shining Waters. Yes, that's the right name for it. I know because of the thrill. When I hit on a name that suits exactly, it gives me a thrill. Do things ever give you a thrill?" Matthew ruminated. "Well now, yes, it always kind of gives me a thrill to see them ugly white grubs that spade up in the cucumber beds. I hate the look of them." "Oh, I don't think that can be exactly the same kind of thrill. Do you think it can? There doesn't seem to be much connection between grubs and lakes of shining waters, does there? But why do other people call it Barry's Pond?" "I reckon because Mr. Barry lives up there in that house. Orchard Slope's the name of his place. If it wasn't for that big bush behind it, you could see Green Gables from here. But we have to go over the bridge and round by the road, so it's near half a mile further." "Has Mr. Barry any little girls?" "Well, not so very little either, about my size. He's got one about 11. Her name is Diana." Oh, with a long drawing of breath. What a perfectly lovely name. "Well, now, I don't know. There's something dreadful heathenish about it. Seems to me I'd rather Jane or Mary or some sensible name like that. But when Diana was born, there was a schoolmaster boarding there, and they gave him the naming of her, and he called her Diana. I wish there had been a schoolmaster like that around when I was born then. Good night, dear lake of the shining waters. I always say good night to the things I love, just as I would to people. I think they like it. That water looks like it was smiling at me. When they had driven up further around the hill and around a corner, Matthew said, "We're pretty near home now. That's Green Gables over—" "Oh, don't tell me," she interrupted breathlessly, catching at his partially raised arm and shutting her eyes that she might not see his gesture. "Let me guess. I'm sure I'll guess right." She opened her eyes and looked about her. They were on the crest of a hill. The sun had set some time since, but the landscape was still clear in the mellow afterlight. To the west, a dark church spire rose up against a marigold sky. Below was a little valley, and beyond a long, gently rising slope with snug farmsteads scattered along it. From one to another, the child's eyes darted, eager and wistful. At last they lingered on one, away to the left, far back from the road, dimly white with blossoming trees in the twilight of surrounding woods. Over it, in the stainless southwest sky, a great crystal white star was shining like a lamp of guidance and promise. "That's it, isn't it?" she said, pointing. Matthew slapped the reins and the sorrels back delightedly. "Well, now you've guessed it, but I reckon Mrs. Spencer described it so you could tell." "No, she didn't. Really, she didn't. All she said might just as well have been about most of the other places. I hadn't any real idea what it looked like, but just as soon as I saw it, I felt it was home. Oh, it seems as if I must be in a dream. Do you know, my arm must be black and blue from the elbow up, for I've pinched myself so many times today. Every little while, a horrible, sickening feeling would come over me, and I'd be so afraid it was all a dream. Then I'd pinch myself to see if it was real, until suddenly I remembered that even supposing it was only a dream, I'd better go on dreaming as long as I could. So I stopped pinching. But it is real, and we're nearly home." With a sigh of rapture, she relapsed into silence. Matthew stirred uneasily. He felt glad that it would be Marilla and not he who would have to tell this waif of the world that the home she longed for was not to be hers after all. They drove over Lynn's Hollow, where it was already quite dark, but not so dark that Mrs. Rachel could not see them from her window vantage, and up the hill and into the long lane of Green Gables. By the time they arrived at the house, Matthew was shrinking from the approaching revelation with an energy he did not understand. It was not of Marilla or himself he was thinking, of the trouble this mistake was probably going to make for them, but of the child's disappointment. When he thought of that rapt light being quenched in her eyes, he had an uncomfortable feeling that he was going to assist at murdering something, much the same feeling that came over him when he had to kill any other innocent little creature. The yard was quite dark as they turned into it, and the poplar leaves were rustling silkily all around it. "Listen to the trees talking in their sleep," she whispered as he lifted her to the ground. What nice dreams they must have. Then, holding tightly to the carpet bag which contained all her worldly goods, she followed him into the house. Chapter 3. Marilla Cuthbert is Surprised. Marilla came briskly forward as Matthew opened the door, but when her eyes fell of the odd little figure in the stiff, ugly dress with the long braids of red hair and the eager, luminous eyes, she stopped short in amazement. "Matthew Cuthbert, who's that?" she exclaimed. "Where is the boy?" "There wasn't any boy," said Matthew wretchedly. "There was only her." He nodded at the child, remembering that he had never even asked her name. "No boy, but there must have been a boy," insisted Marilla. "We sent word to Mrs. Spencer to bring a boy." "Well, she didn't. She brought her. I asked the station master. And I had to bring her home. She couldn't be left there no matter where the mistake had come in." "Well, this is a pretty piece of business," exclaimed Marilla. During this dialogue, the child had remained silent, her eyes roving from one to the other, all the animation fading out of her face. Suddenly, she seemed to grasp the full meaning of what had been said. Dropping her precious carpet bag, she sprang forward a step and clasped her hands. "You don't want me," she cried. "You don't want me because I'm not a boy. I might have expected it. Nobody ever did want me. I might have known it was all too beautiful to last. I might have known nobody really did want me. Oh, what shall I do? I'm going to burst into tears." Burst into tears she did, sitting down on a chair by the table, flinging her arms out upon it and burying her face in them. She proceeded to cry stormily. Marilla and Matthew looked at each other across the stove. Neither of them knew what to say or do. Finally, Marilla stepped lamely into the breach. "Well, well, there's no need to cry so about it." "Yes, there is need." The child raised her head quickly, revealing a tear-stained face and trembling lips. "You would cry too if you were an orphan and had come to a place you thought was going to be home and found out they didn't want you because you weren't a boy. Oh, this is the most tragical thing that has ever happened to me." Something like a reluctant smile, rather rusty from long disuse, mellowed Marilla's grim expression. "Well, don't cry any more. We're not going to turn you out of doors tonight. You'll have to stay here until we can investigate this affair. What's your name?" The child hesitated for a moment. "Will you please call me Cordelia?" she said eagerly. "Call you Cordelia? Is that your name?" "No, it's not exactly my name, but I would love to be called Cordelia. It's such a perfectly elegant name." "I don't know what on earth you mean. If Cordelia isn't your name, what is it?" "Anne Shirley," reluctantly faltered forth the owner of that name. "But oh, please do call me Cordelia. It can't matter much to you what you call me if I'm only going to be here a little while, can it? And Anne is such an unromantic name." "Unromantic? Fiddlesticks," said the unsympathetic Marilla. "Anne is a real good, plain, sensible name. You've no need to be ashamed of it." "Oh, I'm not ashamed of it," explained Anne. "Only I like Cordelia better. I've always imagined that my name was Cordelia. At least, I always have of late years. When I was young, I used to imagine it was Geraldine, but I like Cordelia better now. But if you call me Anne, please call me Anne spelled with an E." What difference does it make how it's spelled? Asked Marilla with another rusty smile as she picked up the teapot. Oh, it makes such a difference. It looks so much nicer. When you hear a name pronounced, can't you always see it in your mind, just as if it were printed out? I can. And A-N-N looks dreadful, but A-N-N-E looks so much more distinguished. If you'll only call me Anne spelled with an E, I shall try to reconcile myself to not being called Cordelia. Very well then, Anne spelled with an E. Can you tell us how this mistake came to be made? We sent word to Mrs. Spencer to bring us a boy. Were there no boys at the asylum? Oh yes, there was an abundance of them, but Mrs. Spencer said distinctly that you wanted a girl about 11 years old, and the matron said she thought I would do. You don't know how delighted I was. I couldn't sleep all last night for joy. Oh, she added reproachfully, turning to Matthew, why didn't you tell me at the station that you didn't want me and leave me there? If I hadn't seen the white way of delight in the lake of shining waters, it wouldn't be so hard. What on earth does she mean? Demanded Marilla, staring at Matthew. She's just referring to some conversation we had on the road, said Matthew hastily. I'm going out to put the mare in, Marilla. Have tea ready when I come back. Did Mrs. Spencer bring anybody over besides you? Continued Marilla when Matthew had gone out. She brought Lily Jones for herself. Lily is only 5 years old, and she is very beautiful and had nut-brown hair. If I was very beautiful and had nut-brown hair, would you keep me? No. We want a boy to help Matthew on the farm. A girl would be of no use to us. Take off your hat. I'll lay it and your bag on the hall table. Anne took off her hat meekly. Matthew came back presently and they sat down to supper, but Anne could not eat. In vain she nibbled at the bread and butter and pecked at the crabapple preserve out of the little scalloped glass dish by her plate. She did not really make any headway at all. You're not eating anything, said Marilla sharply, eyeing her as if it were a serious shortcoming. Anne sighed. I can't. I'm in the depths of despair. Can you eat when you're in the depths of despair? I've never been in the depths of despair, so I can't say, responded Marilla. Weren't you? Well, did you ever try to imagine you were in the depths of despair? No, I didn't. Then I don't think you can understand what it's like. It's very uncomfortable feeling indeed. When you try to eat, a lump comes right up in your throat, and you can't swallow anything, not even if it was a chocolate caramel. I had one chocolate caramel once 2 years ago, and it was simply delicious. I've often dreamed since then that I had a lot of chocolate caramels, but I always wake up just when I'm going to eat them. I do hope you won't be offended because I can't eat. Everything is extremely nice, but still I cannot eat. I guess she's tired, said Matthew, who hadn't spoken since his return from the barn. Best put her to bed, Marilla. Marilla had been wondering where Anne should be put to bed. She had prepared a couch in the kitchen chamber for the desired and expected boy, but although it was neat and clean, it did not seem quite the thing to put a girl there somehow. But the spare room was out of the question for such a stray waif, so there remained only the east gable room. Marilla lighted a candle and told Anne to follow her, which Anne spiritlessly did, taking her hat and carpet bag from the hall table as she passed. The hall was fearsomely clean. The little gable chamber in which she presently found herself seemed still cleaner. Marilla set the candle on a three-legged, three-cornered table and turned down the bedclothes. I suppose you have a nightgown, she questioned. Anne nodded. Yes, I have two. The matron of the asylum made them for me. They're fearfully skimpy. There's never enough to go around in an asylum, so things are always skimpy. At least in a poor asylum like ours. I hate skimpy night dresses, but one can dream just as well in them as lovely trailing ones with frills around the neck. That's one consolation. Well, undress as quick as you can and go to bed. I'll come back in a few minutes for the candle. I daren't trust you to put it out yourself. When Marilla had gone, Anne looked around her wistfully. The whitewashed walls were so painfully bare and staring that she thought they must ache over their own bareness. The floor was bare too, except for a round braided mat in the middle, such as Anne had never seen before. In one corner was the bed, a high, old-fashioned one, with 4 dark, low-turned posts. In the other corner was the aforesaid 3-corner table adorned with a fat, red velvet pincushion, hard enough to turn the point of the most adventurous pin. Above it hung a little 6x8 mirror. Midway between the table and bed was the window, with an icy white muslin frill over it, and opposite it was the washstand. The whole apartment was of rigidity, not to be described in words, but which sent a shiver to the very marrow of Anne's bones. With a sob, she hastily discarded her garments, put on the skimpy nightgown, and sprang into bed, where she burrowed face downward into the pillow and pulled the clothes over her head. When Marilla came up for the light, various skimpy articles of clothes scattered most untidily over the floor, and a certain tempestuous appearance of the bed were the only indications of any presence save her own. She deliberately picked up Anne's clothes, placed them neatly on a prim yellow chair, and then, taking up the candle, went over to the bed. "Good night," she said, a little awkwardly but not unkindly. Anne's white face and big eyes appeared over the bedclothes suddenly. "How can you call it a good night when you know it must be the very worst night I've ever had?" she said reproachfully. Then she dived down into the invisibility again. Marilla went slowly down to the kitchen and proceeded to wash the supper dishes. Matthew was smoking, a sure sign of difficulty of mind. He seldom smoked, for Marilla set her face against it as a filthy habit, but at certain times and seasons he felt driven to it, and then Marilla winked at the practice, realizing that a mere man must have some vent for his emotions. "Well, this is a pretty kettle of fish," she said wrathfully. "This is what comes of sending word instead of going ourselves. Richard Spencer's folks have twisted that message somehow. One of us will have to drive over and see Mrs. Spencer tomorrow, that's certain. This girl will have to be sent back to the asylum." "Yes, I suppose so," said Matthew reluctantly. "You suppose so? Don't you know it?" "Well, now, she's a real nice little thing, Marilla. It's kind of a pity to send her back when she's so set on staying here." "Matthew Cuthbert, you don't mean to say you think we ought to keep her?" Marilla's astonishment could not have been greater if Matthew had expressed a predilection for standing on his head. "Well, now, no, I suppose not exactly," stammered Matthew, uncomfortably driven into a corner for his precise meaning. "I suppose we could hardly be expected to keep her." "I should say not. What good would she be to us?" We might be some good to her, said Matthew suddenly and unexpectedly. Matthew Cuthbert, I believe that child has bewitched you. I can see as plain that you want to keep her. Well now, she's a real interesting little thing, persisted Matthew. You should have heard her talk coming from the station. Oh, she can talk fast enough. I saw that at once. It's nothing in her favor either. I don't like children who have so much to say. I don't want an orphan girl, and if I did, she isn't the style I'd pick out. There's something I don't understand about her. No, she's got to be dispatched straight away back to where she came from. I could hire a boy to help me, said Matthew, and she'd be company for you. I'm not suffering for company, said Marilla shortly, and I'm not going to keep her. Well now, it's just as you say, of course, Marilla, said Matthew, rising and putting his pipe away. I'm going to bed. To bed went Matthew, and to bed, when she had put her dishes away, went Marilla, frowning most resolutely. And upstairs, in the east gable, a lonely, heart-hungry, friendless child cried herself to sleep. Chapter 4. Morning at Green Gables. It was broad daylight when Anne awoke and sat up in bed, staring confusedly at the window through which a flood of cherry sunshine was pouring, and outside of which something white and feathery waved across glimpses of blue sky. For a moment she could not remember where she was. First came a delightful thrill as something very pleasant, then a horrible remembrance. This was Green Gables, and they didn't want her because she wasn't a boy. But it was morning, and yes, it was a cherry tree in full bloom outside of her window. With a bound, she was out of bed and across the floor. She pushed up the sash. It went up stiffly and creakily, as if it hadn't been opened for a long time, which was the case, and it stuck so tight that nothing was needed to hold it up. Anne dropped on her knees and gazed out into the June morning, her eyes glistening with delight. Oh, wasn't it beautiful? Wasn't it a lovely place? Suppose she wasn't really going to stay here. She would imagine she was. There was scope for imagination here. A huge cherry tree grew outside, so close that its boughs tapped against the house. And it was so thick set with blossoms that hardly a leaf was to be seen. On both sides of the house was a big orchard, one of apple trees and one of cherry trees, also showered over with blossoms. And their grass was all sprinkled with dandelions. In the garden below were lilac trees purple with flowers, and their dizzily sweet fragrance drifted up to the window on the morning wind. Below the garden, a green field, lush with clover, sloped down to the hollow where the brook ran and where scores of white birches grew, upspringing airily out of an undergrowth suggestive of delightful possibilities in ferns and mosses and woodsy things generally. Beyond it was a hill, green and feathery, with spruce and fir. There was a gap in it where the gray gable end of the little house she had seen from the other side of the lake of shining waters was visible. Off to the left were the big barns, and beyond them, way down over green, low-sloping fields, was a sparkling blue glimpse of sea. Anne's beauty-loving eyes lingered on it all, taking everything greedily in. She had looked on so many unlovely places in her life, poor child, but this was as lovely as anything she had ever dreamed. She knelt there, lost to everything but the loveliness around her, until she was startled by a hand on her shoulder. Marilla had come in unheard by the small dreamer. "It's time you were dressed," she said curtly. Marilla really did not know how to talk to the child, and her uncomfortable ignorance made her crisp and curt when she did not mean to be. Anne stood up and drew a long breath. "Oh, isn't it wonderful," she said, waving her hand comprehensively at the good world outside. "It's a big tree," said Marilla, "and it blooms great, but the fruit don't amount to much, never, small and wormy." "Oh, I don't mean just the tree. Of course it's lovely. Yes, it's radiantly lovely. It blooms as if it meant it. But I meant everything, the garden and the orchard and the brook and the woods, the whole big dear world. Don't you feel as if you just loved the world on a morning like this? And I can hear the brook laughing all the way up here. Have you ever noticed what a cheerful thing brooks are? They're always laughing. Even in wintertime, I've heard them under the ice. I'm so glad there's a brook near Green Gables. Perhaps you think it doesn't make any difference to me when you're not going to keep me, but it does. I shall always like to remember that there is a brook at Green Gables, even if I never see it again. If there wasn't a brook, I'd be haunted by the uncomfortable feeling that there ought to be one. I'm not in the depths of despair this morning. I never can be in the morning. Isn't it a splendid thing that there are mornings? But I feel very sad. I've just been imagining that it was really me you wanted after all, and that I was to stay here forever and ever. It was a great comfort while it lasted. But the worst of imagining things is that the time comes when you have to stop, and that hurts. You'd better get dressed and come downstairs, and never mind your imagining," said Marilla as soon as she could get a word in edgewise. "Breakfast is waiting. Wash your face and comb your hair. Leave the window up and turn your bedclothes back over the foot of the bed. Be as smart as you can." Anne could evidently be smart to some purpose, for she was downstairs in 10 minutes' time, with her clothes neatly on, her hair brushed and braided, her face washed, and a comfortable consciousness pervading her soul that she had fulfilled all Marilla's requirements. As a matter of fact, however, she had forgotten to turn back the bedclothes. "I'm pretty hungry this morning," she announced as she slipped into the chair Marilla placed for her. "The world doesn't seem such a howling wilderness as it did last night, so I'm glad it's a sunshiny morning. But I like rainy mornings real well, too. All sorts of mornings are interesting, don't you think? You don't know what's going to happen through the day, and there's so much scope for imagination. But I'm glad it's not rainy today because it's easier to be cheerful and bear up under affliction on a sunny day. I feel that I have a good deal to bear up under. It's all very well to read about sorrows and imagine yourself living through them heroically, but it's not so nice when you really come to have them, is it?" "For pity's sake, hold your tongue," said Marilla. "You talk entirely too much for a little girl." Thereupon, Anne held her tongue so obediently and thoroughly that her continued silence made Marilla rather nervous, as if in the presence of something not exactly natural. Matthew also held his tongue, but this was natural, so that the meal was a very silent one. As it progressed, Anne became more and more abstracted, eating mechanically, with her big eyes fixed unswervingly and unseeingly on the sky outside the window. This made Marilla more nervous than ever, that while this odd child's body might be there at the table, her spirit was far away in some remote, airy cloudland, borne aloft on the wings of imagination. Who would want such a child about the place? Yet Matthew wished to keep her of all the unaccountable things. Marilla felt that he wanted it just as much this morning as he had the night before, and that he would go on wanting it. That was Matthew's way. Take a whim into his head and cling to it with the most amazing, silent persistency, a persistency 10 times more potent and effectual in its very silence than if he had talked it out. When the meal was ended, Anne came out of her reverie and offered to wash the dishes. "Can you wash dishes right?" asked Marilla distrustfully. "Pretty well. I'm better at looking after children, though. I've had so much experience at that. It's such a pity you haven't any here for me to look after." "I don't feel as if I wanted any more children to look after than I've got at present. You're a problem enough in all conscience. What's to be done with you, I don't know. Matthew is a most ridiculous man." "I think he's lovely," said Anne reproachfully. "He is so very sympathetic. He didn't mind how much I talked. He seemed to like it. I felt that he was a kindred spirit as soon as ever I saw him." "You're both queer enough, if that's what you mean by kindred spirit," said Marilla with a sniff. "Yes, you may wash the dishes. Take plenty of hot water and be sure you dry them well. I've got enough to attend to this morning, for I'll have to drive over to White Sands in the afternoon and see Mrs. Spencer. You'll come with me, and we'll settle what's to be done with you. After you finish the dishes, go upstairs and make your bed." Anne washed the dishes deftly enough, as Marilla, who kept a sharp eye on the process, discerned. Later on, she made her bed less successfully, for she had never learned the art of wrestling with a feather tick, but it was done somehow and smoothed down, and then Marilla, to get rid of her, told her she might go out of doors and amuse herself until dinner time. Anne flew to the door, face alight, eyes glowing. On the very threshold she stopped short, wheeled about, came back, and sat down by the table, light and glow as effectually blotted out as if someone had clapped an extinguisher on her. "What's the matter now?" demanded Marilla. "I don't dare go out," said Anne in the tone of a martyr relinquishing all earthly joys. "If I can't stay here, there's no use of my loving Green Gables. And if I go out there and get acquainted with all those trees and flowers and the orchard and the brook, I'll not be able to help loving it. It's hard enough now, so I won't make it any harder. I want to go out so much. Everything seems to be calling to me. Anne, Anne, come out to us. Anne, Anne, we want to playmate. But it's better not. There is no use in loving things if you haven't to be torn from them, is there? And it's so hard to keep from loving things, isn't it? That was why I was so glad when I thought I was going to live here. I thought I'd have so many things to love and nothing to hinder me, but that brief dream is over. I am resigned to my fate now, so I don't think I'll go out for fear I'll get unresigned again. What is the name of that geranium on the windowsill, please?" "That's the apple-scented geranium." "Oh, I don't mean that sort of name. I mean just a name you gave it yourself. Didn't you give it a name?" "May I give it one then? May I call it, let me see, Bonnie would do. May I call it Bonnie while I'm here? Oh, do let me. Goodness, I don't care, but where on earth is the sense of naming a geranium? Oh, I like things to have handles even if they're only geraniums. It makes them seem more like people. How do you know but that it hurts a geranium's feelings just to be called a geranium and nothing else? You wouldn't like to be called nothing but a woman all the time. Yes, I shall call it Bonnie. I named the cherry tree outside my bedroom window this morning. I called it Snow Queen because it was so white. Of course, it won't always be in blossom, but one can imagine that it is, can't one? I never in all my life say or heard anything equal to her, muttered Marilla, beating a retreat down to the cellar after potatoes. She is kind of interesting, as Matthew says. I can feel already that I'm wondering what on earth she'll say next. She'll be casting a spell over me, too. She's cast it over Matthew. That look he gave me when he went out and everything he said or hinted last night over again. I wish he was like other men and would talk things out. A body could answer back then and argue him into reason. But what's to be done with a man who just looks? All right, my beautiful friends. We're going to end here. I could just keep reading for hours, but we'll return to this book soon. And in the meanwhile, the angels and I are wishing you sweet and restful dreams. Know that you are loved, you are precious, and we are so deeply grateful for the gift of you.